Hello everyone and welcome back to yet another webinar by REACHLaw. Today we are going to talk to you about K-REACH lead registrations and specifically for the deadline that's coming up at the end of this year, but we'll also cover generic topics that you can use for the other deadlines coming up, so in 27 and 30 also. And this will be a part one webinar of a two-part series where today we'll talk about lead registrations as mentioned, and then part two in March 19th will focus on co-registration of K-REACH and the requirements thereof and so forth, and specifically for the deadline that's coming up at the end of this year. So today we have two presenters guiding you through the hoops and intricacies of the K-REACH lead registration case, and it's Gagan, Kumar and myself. And Gagan, if you will, please give a short intro into yourself, please.
Yes, thank you. And I also welcome participants to this second webinar on K-REACH. I think this is an important session going forward, and this is an important year also for companies doing business. So my name is Gagan Kumar. I'm based out of New Delhi, and I'm basically working in REACH and REACH-like regulations since more than 15 years now, and I'm happy to help companies in navigating this complex and changing regulations and requirements. So happy to help, and we look forward to more engaging queries during this session.
Thank you, Gagan. Yeah, and I'm Frederik Johanson. I'm a partner, head of sales at REACHLaw. I have a background, 20 years actually this year in chemical regulations, environmental due diligence and related topics. And of course, very happy to be here today, guide you through all these interesting nuances of the K-REACH regulation. So let's go forward, just give you some practical information about the webinar. So we will have a Q&A at the end as usual. You can post your questions in the chat in the application we're using, and we'll try to cover as many questions as possible at the end. If we don't cover your particular question, we'll get back to you by email. At least we'll try. And the recording of this webinar will be made available on REACHLaw Talk, so our YouTube channel, so you can actually watch it there. So, and of course, please again, as per usual, please feel free to send us feedback and improvement suggestions, etc. We'll be very happy to look at those and learn and try to be better as we go forward. Okay, so for the agenda today, it'll be very busy, I can tell you, and I promise you that we will not be able to make this in 60 minutes. That's why we have this plus sign here. So if you have to tune out at the top of the hour, then please feel free to watch the YouTube recording afterwards. It will be there and you can easily check it. So don't worry if you have to leave a bit early. You can always come back. So we'll look at REACHLaw in brief, just for those of you who don't know who we are, and then of course we go into the depth of the K-REACH regulation. Gagan will talk about K-REACH in brief and give you an overview of the registration process for existing substances. Then I will take over and talk about the lead registration process, go through the whole thing from kickoff to CICO management. We'll let you know what the CICO is and so forth. Then we'll end with a lead registration action plan for the 2024 deadline, so end of this year deadline, and then go to conclusions and the Q&A at the end. And as I said, this will take a bit longer than 60 minutes, I'm afraid. So REACHLaw, just in brief, I think most of you know us already, but we focus on REACH and REACH-like chemical regulations globally. So this now also, of course, covers K-REACH and K-OSHA in South Korea. Today we'll talk about K-REACH and specifically lead registrations for existing substances. not new substances, because those are submitted by individual submission, albeit many of the things pertaining to dossier development, compilation, and CSR and stuff like that is applicable also to new substances. But coming back to our what REACHLaw does, so we cover these chemical regulations, and of course now we're very busy with K-REACH, but also Turkey, KKD, UK REACH, and of course the mother of all chemical regulations, the EU REACH regulation, but also becoming more and more active in India. And these are the locations of our offices. So we do have offices in all of these jurisdictions, also in Seoul, in South Korea. So we have our own company in South Korea providing K-REACH services and other representative services. I'll get back to that in just a second. So just generally, REACHLaw provides market access services for your chemical products that you want to place in these jurisdictions and more. So we cover everything from registrations to the more demanding work, such as lead registration work, authorization, and so forth. But today, we're focusing on K-REACH and South Korea. So as mentioned, we do have an office, a subsidiary in South Korea called REACHLaw Korea Limited. It's located in the Gangnam district in Seoul, and we provide services for K-REACH, everything from only representative services going to, of course, the usual pre-registration, co-registration, lead registration services. We'll talk about that in today's webinar. CICO management and preparing, of course, the lead dossiers, the CSRs, but also then notifying new substances and registering, of course, new substances and providing these confirmations of exemptions if someone has a situation where they can apply for an exemption from registration, for example, registration requirements, for example, CBR protection, and more. For K-OSHA, we will not deal with K-OSHA today, but it essentially governs the, in this particular focus, governs the safety data sheets, material safety data sheets, and how to compile them, how to manage them in practice, and how to submit them to the Ministry of Labor in South Korea, and so forth. So we also provide, of course, all related services, such as being an only representative for this K-OSHA MSDS purposes, which is very unique to South Korea in general, because this is not something that is directly comparable with other jurisdictions per se. So there's a special mechanism that you actually be an OR for MSDSs, and that is a service we provide through our entity in South Korea, and all related services also, and such as CBI, confidential business information protection, as part of reporting information as part of safety data sheets and so forth. I think one of the main focuses or let's say goals is to really demystify the whole K-REACH regulation and K-OSHA for that matter for our customers, and just making it as easy as possible for them to understand it and know what needs to be done. And of course, REACHLaw is there to help them through this process of complying with this regulation as clearly and easily as possible. I mentioned our YouTube channel, REACHLaw Talks. Please feel free to head over to YouTube and subscribe to our channel, because there you will find this content that we are, for example, having today. It will be posted there within a week or so. And just for those of you who are going to attend different venues, live venues, this is a slide where you can see where we will be. So the first one is the India Rubber Expo in March in Mumbai. Gagan will be there. Then we have a Helsinki Chemical Forum here in April in Helsinki. I'll be there. Then Chem Expo in India, also in Mumbai later in April. Gagan will be there. Then we have Chem UK in Birmingham in May. I will be there. And then we'll have ChemCon Asia in Bangkok in June. Gagan and myself will be there, plus our colleague from our South Korea office. And then we have ChemSpec Europe, which is a bigger trade fair. I'll be there together with some of our colleagues. And then TurkChem at the end of the year, where we'll talk about K-REACH, sorry, Turkey, KKD I came, maybe K-REACH even. Okay, just before we go into the meat and potatoes of this presentation, just wanting to show this standard slide of things that are happening globally. I will not go through everything. Today we'll talk about K-REACH, EU REACH. You know that we're waiting for the REACH review process and more information on when that will come into gear, so to speak. India REACH for BIS, that is something we're already working on, and if you're placing certain chemicals on the Indian market, you may be required to adhere to certain standards, and we can help you with applying for those licenses. Turkey, of course, we know by now that the registration deadlines have been postponed, so now there's more time to register these substances and do the lead registration works. So that is a welcome change. Ukraine REACH is something that we're expecting to move forward this year. We do not know will it actually enter into force. I think it has to do with many factors, of course, playing into this, but that is something we're monitoring, and will of course provide more information as we go forward. And we will have a webinar on Ukraine REACH quite soon also. And UK REACH, that is something that's soldiering on, albeit we're still waiting for more information about the alternative registration model. But today we'll focus on K-REACH. And just before we go and hand over to Gagan, just want to highlight this disclaimer and copyright, of course, so that any actions you may take based on this presentation is of course your own responsibility and risk. So no representation or warranties are made with regards to the completeness or accuracy of the content of this presentation, and no liability is accepted by REACHLaw on this matter. So, and a bunch of copyright notices which you can find in this slide. So that's the small print, and now I will just terminate the video feed just to save a bit of bandwidth, as I see that the slide changing is a bit slow. So I will now hand over to Gagan. So please, Gagan, tell me when to change slides, and Gagan is going to talk about K-REACH in brief.
Thank you, Freddie. So yeah, next slide, please. Yes, so I think to set the base for the later half of the session, I think the K-REACH, so-called Korea REACH regulation is already kind of old regulation, which has also one deadline experience and some registration experience. So there is a good amount of experience with authorities handling registration, which means that that this 2024, which is the focus of REACHLaw, also to help companies, is to understand that regulators already have enough experience, and due to that there is some, I think, a couple of changes, amendments to this K-REACH, and of course this is it is governed by the Ministry of Environment, and there are other authorities which are involved. So I would recommend that please you can follow our 12th of December webinar, where we have more information on these authorities. And we have also covered, as mentioned in July, that this Ministry of Environment has around 510 priority existing substances, which they were looking companies to register already by 30th of June. So those has been, some of them has already been registered. And if you happen to sell any of this now, then you need to register it before you can export this to South Korea. So even though they're existing, this deadline is already passed, and therefore the market access is only allowed after you register, like in all other regulatory processes that we have in other countries. So very briefly, K-REACH is having similar concepts. So they are I think amended. This important amendment is to introduce a pre-registration system to allow the transitional or the extension deadlines for companies to register their chemicals. These are like 3 deadlines we will see in the next slides. And this is only for like phase in or existing substances. We will have some definitions also coming up. And it's important for you as a company to understand that where your substances lie. So scoping and building your inventory is very important, and therefore I recommend to also go through this 12th of December webinar, where we have all content explained in detailed manner, and as also we have provided some screenshots of this portal where you can access and understand whether your substance is existing or new substance. And it's like covering your industrial chemicals, or everything which is involving chemicals are essentially controlled by this regulation like EU. And if you happen to be a foreign manufacturer, so in KREACH it's termed as overseas manufacturer, and it's the same thing. So if you want to have your independent access to South Korea, the authority and the legislation allows you to make an appointment with the professional representative in South Korea to handle all regulatory requirements, which will give you market access, which means pre-registration, registration, also maintaining those registrations. And as an only representative company has other obligations, which essentially is a requirement, because they would rely on local representative to handle the compliances and communications. But this is, I think, already in place. So you can always consider to have an independent registration to have a free access and control on your product pricing and market. Next slide, please. And sometimes you might hear from your customers that this is written as AREC. So as a legal text, it is termed as Act on Registration and Evaluation of Chemicals. So there will, of course, the Act is the main legislation. And in this presentation, we are simplifying it as KREACH, which is, of course, quite common term nowadays. But you may get this new term, which is the same. And there are corresponding regulations, which is decree and rule, and these are supporting the act. So there are certain details like documentations, forms, and also what is required on the data requirements, how to handle your applications. So it is basically giving you some practical guidance and information to handle the regulatory requirements coming from the act. So this is something you can follow, and we have all these acts explained earlier, and we have noticed that this KREACH was amended already on 6th of February 2024, which is a few days earlier from now. So you can see the amendments are quite frequent, and of course there are certain enforcement dates is later in 2025. So some we will see in this next slides. Next slide, please. So as the basic requirements, the KREACH will give you market access, and they have defined what kind of chemicals you are doing business with. So one is the existing substances, and existing substances are already manufactured or imported into South Korea, and the threshold remains 1 ton per annum on calendar year basis. And you can pre-register. So pre-registration is in this term again a term, but it is notifications. But to simplify, we are using pre-registration, and this is also possible. So late pre-registration is possible under certain conditions. So, and then once you have done this late pre-registration, you have certain deadline, as you will see, you need to register. So there is a transitional deadlines, and you will be able to access market right after the pre-registration. And then to continue to access, you need to complete registration by your set deadline, and there will be no extension to these deadlines. Then whatever is not existing, I think, and there is of course the demonstration and what we have provided earlier in the webinar. So these new substances are treated as new, meaning authority doesn't have any information on these substances, and they would require applicants or the only representative to register. And before you place this on South Korean market, currently there is a threshold of 100 kilos, and as you see in this slide that this amendment is coming from this 6th of February, and this is now amended to 1 ton per annum, but it is enforced from 1st of January 2025. And similarly, there are other amendments in the K-REACH Act, and some of them I think are coming from enforced from August and July 2025. So there are several amendments to this act. Next slide, please. So these are the definitions I was talking about. The existing substances, phase-in substances. So you can budget that you will eventually be able to spread your costing, budgeting for a couple of years. And it is only valid to the phase-in substance, not the priority existing substances. And these are the control substances which require, there is a list which is public, and you can see that there are around 510 substances. If you list any of the substances listed, you need to register it before you export this to South Korea. And the data requirements, I think, remains as per the tonnage bands. And for existing substances, you have a deadlines, which we will see in the next slides. The new substances we will term as non-phase-in, but it's a new substance, which means that it's not an existing, and you need to register before you export or sell it to South Korea. So it's important that that you understand these concepts, and maybe the importer try to explain you these things, and then it means that they are struggling to get a registration and you're losing business because this has not, it's a new substance. So please try and make this inventory already now to understand what are these terms and where you stand with these substance categories. And KE number is kind of recognized in Korea as an existing substances and is linked to the cash number most of the time. So that is how you can relate. And this is also, we have provided information, this IT system, how you can access this number. Then this is the part of the authority I was talking about, National Institute of Environment. They have certain powers under this act, and they will be able to do some decisions regarding your registrations and management and evaluations at the time of your registration journey and post-registration journey. CICO, Frederik will, I think, talk about this more, but this is something similar to making same chemical pre-registered or late pre-registered applicants to come together and agree on the registration, so that it can save cost for the companies and have a more time-bound activities. So we will, I think, explain more later on. Next slide, please. Then the exemptions, also we have, I will briefly explain that the exemptions in Korea, some of them are straightforward, which you see on the left hand side as per Article 3. So regardless of the quantities and other applications, if it is meeting these definitions, then these are exempted from registration, because there are certain other regulatory regulations which are, I think, covering these, controlling these substances. So that's why K-REACH is not applicable. And then we have exemptions. There are exemptions which are self-declaration according to Article 11, which means that if you meet these definitions, then you can declare. as a company statement that these are exempted and your customers can accept that. Then you have certain other exemptions which demands the confirmation from the authority, and this is something you need to consider very carefully. Polymers are covered in that category if these are meeting some criteria. I think we have one slide on that, but it is important that you see that there are certain differences. So you cannot access market unless until you have an exemption from authority, and you have to do it before you place these category substances, and there are 30 days that you have to apply for this exemption. And I think there is already a list of polymers. I think explain it in that slide. And if you see the non-isolated intermediates, isolated intermediate basically are also part of exemption, which is not common with EU REACH, where you need to register. So this is, I think, important. Regardless of quantity, you can apply for exemption, and access market. So this is also important that Korea has provided. And then there are certain special consideration is for the transported isolated intermediates, and if it is meeting the control conditions, then you can omit the data. So with very less requirements, basically administration information, you can apply for registration. Next slide, please. Then this is an important slide. I will not go into the details, but this is something I will explain that the polymer registration is something which is new to Korea. Of course, it may come also for EU for certain set of polymers, but for Korea you have that you need to apply for registration if your polymers are not meeting this low concern criteria, PLC. Then you need to apply for registration, and they are reduced registration. So for example, you are exporting 1,000 plus polymer into Korea, and if it is basically not meeting this, then you have a reduced requirement of 100 to 1,000. Similarly, 100 to 1,000 has a reduced requirements of 10 to 100. And I think there is also provision that if these are not hazardous according to GHS, then it's just 1 to 10 tons data requirement. So it is important that consulting a professional here, because polymer is a big I think imports into Korea considering their economy, and it's important that you analyze your polymers, and if it is an exemption, I think there are around 1,000 exemptions already published. An authority published this couple of times a year. So the listing is with cache number and chemical name of the polymer. So it's important that if your product is listed and it's the same process, then it's clear that you can apply for exemption, but you have to apply for exemption. So this is something interesting information I would like to share. Then exemption, as I mentioned, you need to apply this before you export certain categories that we have seen earlier. Reduced data requirements, which I think Frederik will also cover. It's not that you have a set data requirements for tonnage band, but with the classification, you can reduce your data requirement. And then others, there are similarities. Safety data sheet has a difference. You are looking, I think, changes that you need an only representative. Foreign companies cannot just get this registration submission, MSDS submission, and you need to use this only representative, or your importer is taking care of this, like in other registration requirements. So next slide, please. Then I will also talk about the registration process steps for existing substances. Next slide, please. And the basics is that if you are manufacturing or as a foreign manufacturer, and Korean companies are importing substances more than 1 ton, and new chemicals more than 1,000 kilos, which will change next year to 1 ton. So you will see only 1 ton here in 2025 webinars. So this is you need to register those chemicals, and this is the tonnage band 1 to 10, and these are 4 tonnage bands. More than 1,000 tons you cannot register now, but we have certain provisions to, if you are looking to enter market, then please discuss your case separately. Then registration types, we have full substance registration usual, then transported isolated with, as I mentioned earlier, is a reduced, no data requirements, and on-site are covered under exemption applications. Everything is in Korean language, and they have a special IT system, which also you will see in the next slides. Next slide, please. This is the timetable, and you will see that for 100 to 1,000 and 10 to 100 and 1 to 10, you have time to register, but the focus is 2024. We are already in March, and it's important that you focus for this year and see that you have any actions under K-REACH. Then we would be happy to address and discuss and help you that you still get access to market beyond 2024. So this is something which is you can refer. Next slide, please. And this also I explained, but to repeat that this registration of polymers is required if you are not having a polymer of low concern. If you have a polymer of low concern, then it will go under exemption, and you had to do certain testing to prove that and apply for exemption. And if you want, if doesn't, so first step is, of course, look for exemption and follow the list I was talking about. And if you see that your chemicals on the list, then you are certain that you can apply for exemption. But if it is not, then you can still consider this low criteria if you are not sure, and then see that it is, if it is not accepted, then the second step is to register with the reduced data requirements. So this is something you should consider now, because it will take more time considering the exemption testing and also certain discussions with the authority to explain your application, and then see if they're really looking for registration on polymers. So that's why it's all kind of communication with authority to really see that we defense and apply for that. So important step for companies to look into that provision. Next slide, please. And this is something on a process. I will focus on the existing substances. So if you have more than 1 ton, then you can do a late P registration, and as I said, it's possible. And once you late P registers, then you have to apply for registration. The deadlines we have also seen. It's also on this slide, starting from 2024, which is for this year, and then 2027 and 2030. And then registration process will, once registered, then authority will undertake the evaluation, which is termed as hazard review according to the GHS, and then risk assessment, also looking at the CSRs. And then they will further control based on several consultations and communications with the registrants and other stakeholders to either authorize, restrict, and prohibit these substances. And there are also already the list of these substances coming from the dynamic nature of registration and evaluation. I think more than 1,000 existing chemicals have already been registered. So I think this list will grow after 2024. So this is like HVACs and REACH further control. So similar other regulators are following. Then new substance and there is, of course, for priority substances, you need to register directly. But for new substances, which is more than 1,000 kilos, and you need to inquire. It's not looking at your several data requirements, but you still need to inquire with certain information to see if the registration is available and you are part of the joint submission and things like that. So this is something which is there, and I think if you have anything on this, we can of course support. And new substances will change to 1 ton. So it will be, inquiry will still be there, but it will be threshold is 1 ton. Next slide, please. Then this is the joint submission concept. As you're all aware that we will cover this in the next slides, that if you have a phase-in or existing chemical, then once you apply for pre-registration, late pre-registration, and you think that you will wait for somebody to take lead, then you will be potential co-registrant since you have a market there. And these I think are more defined in Article 15 and 16. So joint submission is something which is we will explore this lead possibility, and then we will see that you need to register before the deadline to the Ministry of Environment. And this entire management of starting from this pre-registration and data sharing, dossier management, and everything is done this CICO management, which I think Frederik will explain you more. So this is, I think, a common concept, as you know already. And if you are not, there are certain criteria. If you don't see that it meets your requirements and maybe it's expensive or you have some own data, then you can opt out and register as individual. We are not covering that process here in this webinar, but we will definitely discuss this if you have such cases. Next slide, please. So this is something which you are already aware of when you think that the lead registration is something needs to take the leadership role in this same substance group, and then it will part of the CICO. We will explain this as I mentioned, but this is more of the initial work which is important to set the companies and how you are setting those co-registrants within this registration program for 2024, of course. And then substance identification, which is I think important, as it's a pre-registration, so you don't have this data available from the companies. It will take time, like in the days of UREACH pre-registration and registration phases. Then the data requirements, of course, will be time consuming. Then you are looking at the fair deal to have your fair price for letter of access. And then once it is clear, then you will basically manage the registration, completing the dossier requirements, submitting to the authority. And of course, as a lead, you need to submit much earlier so the co-registrants can register in the deadline. And authority also reviews this, so they will take their own time to give you the registration. We will see this in the next slides. And once you have registered, you have post submission maintenance, which is a continuous requirements where you will interact more with authorities and other stakeholders. So next slide, please. Then this co-registration is something which also we will cover in part 2 in more detail. But to briefly give you this, that you are part of this co-registration and you are a co-registrant, then you need to decide whether you are an active or passive. We will of course discuss this more later. What does it mean? And this is a similar process. Then agree on substance identity, and you have to see whether you have your own data that you want to sell at a fair price, and then you will have some adjustments to the letter of access fees, and then you will compile your registration. Of course, the part of the lead dossier will be referred, and then you will apply for registration like you do in other jurisdictions that using this K-Reach IT, and you have to also register before the deadline. So there are a lot of I think communications and coordination with the lead, so that allows you to register in time. And as far as today. The deadline remains end of December for 100 to 1,000 tons. And the post submission remains same for co-registrants as well as lead. And you will also be updating your registrations time to time. Next slide, please. I think this is the last. No. Yeah, this is, I think, the fees. We have trying to give you this access that where you can find the fees. There are other types of registration where you can also see the fees in the Korean language and currency. But then there is a reduced requirements, but still the fees are quite nominal compared to other registrations that we have seen. And these are based on the tonnage band, and there are certain fees for exemptions also. And but we are covering this registration fees on this table and based on this exchange rate. But you can always follow this link for an update. Next slide, please. So this, as I said, this presentation will be focusing on existing substance lead registration, and we will not be looking at polymer substances or intermediates with reduced data requirements, but we will definitely be able to discuss if you have any cases on the polymers separately. Next slide, please. And for both, I think if you are exporting to South Korea and you have a manufacturing facility outside South Korea, then you would have need a only representative to have a direct registration, not relying on importers registration. So this is the best way to do business in South Korea. Next slide, please.
Okay, thank you.
Yes,
thank you, Gagan.
Sorry for taking over some time.
No, no worries. These are important basics to also understand going forward. So, Gagan, I recommend you just turn off your video feed because the slides changing are a bit slow, so we have more bandwidth for the presentation and audio, which is more important. Okay, so now we go into the lead registration process from kickoff to CICO management, and as Gagan alluded to, we'll tell more what's a CICO and all these terminologies and so forth. So, and I can, as you probably are have noticed already, we will go over time and quite significantly so. But I think now is the now we're coming to the how do you say the core of this presentation today. Okay, probably in hindsight we could have split this into two, but anyway, we will soldier on, no worries. Okay, so we'll look at the process going from pre-registration to lead registration. So this is the overview we are going to talk about today, and I'll try to activate my laser pointer. So here, to get things started, of course, you need to submit the pre-registration, or in this case, if you haven't done it, it can be a late pre-registration, provided you are eligible to do that. Once you have submitted your pre-registration, you will still need to separately join this CICO, which is a chemical substance information communicative organization for K-REACH, and it more or less equals a CIF, if you recall from EU REACH and Turkey KKD, or a so-called substance group if we are talking about UK REACH. Sometimes it's mentioned as KCIF, but here we'll just call it by its most correct name, which is the CICO. So once you've become a member of the CICO, you then need to decide what role you will take. In this webinar, of course, we're talking about the lead registrant. So that means you would become a lead registrant. You would wish to become a lead registrant. Then you need to go through a lead registration selection process. We'll talk about all of these steps in more detail. Then you need to form a registration consortium containing active members as part of the CICO. There are also passive members. We'll come back to this in just a few slides, what that means. Then you need to prepare, of course, the dossier included CSRs and whatnot, and collect the data for that. You need to submit the dossier to the Ministry of Environment. You need to have a near review this dossier, and they may come back with additional questions, provide feedback, and so forth. So NEAR was this National Institute of Environment in Korea. Then once the lead dossier has been approved, active members can go ahead and submit their co-registration dossiers to the ministry, and in parallel, passive members or latecomers will be issued letter of access or the opportunity to buy a letter of access, and then of course themselves go forth with preparing and submitting their K-REACH co-registration dossiers and have this done by the deadline. So now we will go into more details in most of these flows, if you will. So we'll look at the CICO functionalities of this joint registration effort. And this is a bit different from EU REACH and Turkey KKDIK, for example, as there are certain, let's say, specificities to K-REACH and only used in K-REACH, under K-REACH. So we have actually the players of this joint registration effort. These are, of course, the lead registrant. Once it has been elected, we have so-called active members as part of the CICO, but we also have passive members. Active members, as well as the lead registrant, is part of a so-called registration consortium. Sometimes it's called a consortium. Maybe consortium is not the proper word, but as that is used quite commonly, this is what we go with. It's more of a can consider it of a steering entity of the CICO, where you have companies that are active members, meaning they are members of this steering group, this consortium, and are actively involved in the registration preparation process and are the ones that are bearing the initial costs of the registration effort. Registration costs will, of course, be shared with everyone through the letter of access mechanism later on. However, then those companies who are passive, who are not part of the, who don't want to be part of the active subset of companies of the CICO, can sit back and relax for a bit longer. They don't have to pay any costs at this point. They are only providing feedback when asked from the company or the organization that is collecting information for the purpose of developing this joint registration dossier. We'll come back to that in just a second. So these passive members are the ones who will be issued a letter of access later on for being able to then join the joint submission, and thus sharing the costs. And at that point, these guys will be reimbursed. But what is peculiar, if you will, under K-REACH is that typically we have this third party. It can be a member of the CICO. It cannot be the lead registrant of the CICO, but it can be a co-registrant, or it can be an external third party who is a so-called representative consulting company, typically meaning a professional K-REACH service provider who will actually manage and prepare all the technical work for this joint registration effort. So they are the ones who will prepare the dossier, prepare the CSR, initiate data collection from within the CICO, the ones who manage everything, take care of, administer the law, process data sharing, cost sharing process, and so forth. So you have this potentially a third party or a co-registrant of the CICO, but not the lead registrant, who is then working on this. And we'll come back to why it is like this a bit later on. So this representative consulting company, sometimes we'll see it referred to as RCC in this presentation, is really that company who would do the majority of the work for the purpose of registering jointly this particular substance. The other ones are here for the ride, to pay for everything, and of course provide information and so forth, and the lead is there then to submit the dossier, essentially. But then we also have the NIR, so this National Institute of Environment, who is then reviewing and assessing the registration dossier and can connect with this representative consulting company for dialogue on various issues, whether, for example, a study is needed or not, if that is not available for the deadline and so forth. But they can also be in contact directly with the CICO members and the lead registrant for various issues. But typically, as part of the joint registration effort, as we have this representative consulting company, they are in contact with NIR on these type of practical issues pertaining to the development of this joint registration and the lead dossier. So why is this representative consulting company needed? So the idea behind it is that for whatever reason, the authorities in Korea have said that they want to have essentially an independent, neutral third party, a company, professional service provider company, for example, that can work on the joint registration without any bias and prejudice and so forth, not being in the not favoring any particular member or their interest per se. So optimally, this is a third party who is not actually doing the registration per se themselves. That's why we see a lot of Korean consulting companies. They're not necessarily registering the particular substance, but they are working as a so-called this representative consulting company for the benefit of preparing the whole joint registration effort and managing that. This concept, this RCC concept, is not defined in the regulation per se, but it is perceived as a so-called best practice for this joint registration effort in South Korea for K-REACH. How to get things started is that typically the lead registrant, after the election of a lead registrant, they initiate the contact with an RCC of their choice. It could be REACHLaw, it could be some other competent consultancy, assigns the contract, and then this RCC will start operating their CICO, so doing all the technical, managerial, administrative tasks of the CICO and the joint submission, but also including post-registration efforts, so managing the whole submission and issuing letter of accesses later on and so forth, also after the registration. So who can and cannot, I already talked about this briefly, but a lead registrant cannot, should not become this representative consulting company because they are not perceived as independent. Co-registrants can become, because they are not seen as independent in the sense that they are not the lead, so they don't have as much a say in this CICO, so they can be an RCC. But of course, in many cases, if they don't have the competence, they are not relevant candidates to become this representative consulting company. But the best option is typically to have an independent third party or other like a service provider that is maybe not part of the CICO to become a professional, such as a professional K-REACH service provider to become this RCC. So if we take a step back and look at the lead registration selection or election process, I have 2 slides on this. I'll try to speed up a bit. So you have to, as we saw in the overview, when you are joining a CICO, you now have to indicate your interest to become either a passive, active, or first of all, a lead registrant. So if essentially, if no one expresses the interest to become this lead registrant, this sort of temporary, I would say, a CICO coordinator will be responsible for operating the CICO until this lead registrant has been elected. So in many cases, the CICO coordinator will actually be a first step of becoming a lead registrant, because typically a CICO coordinator is someone who is very active and probably has a vested interest to wanting to become the lead themselves. However, if there's only one lead registrant candidate, available and no one else wants to step up, and there's no need for an election and so forth, it is still, this lead still has to be approved by all the CICO members, and this is done in the K-Reach IT system. But if someone does not approve of this lead registrant, which is the sole candidate, they have to come up with an alternative. So then we have the situation where you could have 2 or more lead registrant candidates, and then there needs to be an election, and this election is then initiated by the CICO coordinator. And one of the CICO coordinator, or the CICO coordinator could of course be one of the lead registrant candidates, as we discussed. So they will present their case to the CICO members, typically by email, saying that why they are good lead registrant, or why people want to why they should elect for them to become the lead registrant, and then the voting is actually also performed electronically in this K-Reach IT system, and each member of the CICO having, of course, just 1 vote, and the candidate who gets the simple majority of the votes then wins or gets nominated as the lead for this particular substance. But the interesting case is, of course, as we already saw, that and I'll come back to this a bit later on, but the meaning of the lead registration role is actually not that big, because we have this representative consulting company who is bearing most of the work for preparing the joint registration. So being a lead in South Korea is not quite the same as being a lead under EU REACH, for example. So once this lead registrant is selected, it's typically also good for them to notify all these CICO members by email that all the practicalities of the lead registrant work, and of course then provide information on who they've chosen as a representative consulting company and so forth. So I will not go into details who is a good lead registrant. I think everyone knows this already. So those who typically have the highest vested interest in becoming like a serious player, or who is a serious player on the market, could be a good lead registrant. But again, as mentioned, the lead role is not really that important. It's only important in the beginning to start the work, to get this representative consulting company in play, and after that one, its role and responsibilities are diminished. And also, of course, Gagan mentioned this, but K-Reach only representatives can also be the leads, or they can also be a representative consulting company if they are, for example, an OR for a co-registrant, but they cannot be an OR for the lead registrant and also be the representative consulting company. They could try, but in that case, it might be that the MOE will come back to them and ask that, okay, you can continue to be the representative consulting company, but someone else has to become the lead. So that's quite interesting and very specific to K-Reach in Korea. And of course, if there's no lead registrant, there's no registration, no joint registration. So it's quite clear to have. We need a lead. Okay, we talked about this already. So it's much less demanding being a lead in Korea for K-Reach because of this dynamics with this representative consulting company. So that's quite interesting, actually. Okay. Now let's go to the lead dossier and data requirements and more. And I will actually, in the data requirements part, I will not go into great detail on data requirements depending on your classification of substance. That goes into a bit too much detail, so I will not cover that. But I will cover generic data requirements fairly quickly. So the lead registrant dossier content is as follows. So we have essentially 8 sections of the dossier, very similar to that of EU REACH and EU REACH, where you had certain sections that are representing the bulk of the data for the joint submission. So the needs to include the information on the studies and the endpoint data that you have gathered or tested for. You also include In the beginning of the dossier, you provide company-specific information, such as information on the manufacturer, importer, or only representative, the role thereof. Then, of course, you provide, as part of section 2, I'll get my cursor back here, you provide information on the identity of the chemical substance, name, molecular formula, stuff like that. But typically, analytical information is not required to be included here. So that's a bit different from EU REACH and the other REACH copies, so to speak, for Turkey and UK REACH. Then information about the uses, so identified uses for that particular registrant, but these are also covered, of course, in the lead registration dossier. But then we have the classification and labeling according to GHS, physical chemical properties of the substance. So these and the hazards, these are the sections that need to be populated with information from studies, whether you do those studies yourself or more commonly source this information from, for example, the EU and the EU REACH lead dossiers and so forth, and EU consortia and whatnot. Guidance of safe use also has to be provided, including information about PPEs, first aid measures, etc. Very similar to EU REACH and the Turkey KKD-IK, for example. Then under section 8, if you are registering your substance at 10 tons or more, you need to then go through this hazard assessment, essentially include a chemical safety report with the appropriate exposure scenarios where applicable in the dossier. And also actually, I'll cover this, but here you also will actually need to include, if available to you, the actual studies, if available in English or Korean language. Well, we'll come back to that. And all of this is compiled into the lead dossier online and submitted to the Ministry of Environment. And the authority approval is done by this NIR, so the National Institute of Environment in South Korea. So that is the construct of the lead dossier. If you look at data requirements per tonnage band, again, it depends a bit on the hazards of the substance. In some cases, you do not need to do certain tests depending on the hazard classification and so forth. But here I just provide the max number of different endpoint data requirements per tonnage band. We will not go into details here, but most of this information, typically if you start now in Korea for K-REACH preparing a lead dossier, this representative consulting company, for example, then you would get this information from the EU dossiers and or other data from elsewhere, of course, without the need to necessarily do additional testing, because testing takes time, and time is something that we do not have in abundance for the deadline this year. So you can see that the endpoints required is quite substantial, very similar to EU REACH. These are bundled maybe a bit differently, or they are bundled a bit differently, but you can see it's comparable with the endpoints for EU REACH. So next we have a list of the different endpoints for physical chemical properties, toxicological, ecotoxicological, and so forth. I will not go in detail here. I just wanted to show what those are, and these are representing like a worst case scenario. So sometimes you can waive certain tests, endpoints based on hazards and uses of the substance, but these tables just represent the worst case, if you will. So I invite you to look at this if you want to in more detail by just pausing the video on YouTube, for example. I will not go into details, this as mentioned, just will browse through this quite quickly. So ecotoxicological information here we have 2 pages, and many of these, most of these, as you can see, are actually based on OECD test guidelines. So in many cases, meaning GLP compliance for the laboratories required. Looking at the second page for ecotoxicological information, again, testing guidelines, the actual endpoints for ecotoxicological endpoints shown here, and of course increasing with the tonnage band. Then we have toxicological information, and as said, again, increasing essentially by the tonnage band. And again, testing guidelines according to different OECD standards. As said, we'll not go into details and invite you to pause the video in the recording to have a detailed look. So of course, as with any other jurisdiction and any other data, it is of great importance that you, when you are preparing the lead dossier, so this is something that the representative consulting company is doing, you of course have legitimate access to the data that you need. And getting this legitimate access to the data for K-REACH joint registration purposes is of course a key activity. So for example, if you start your lead registration effort today together with your RCC, representative consulting company, then this is something that they would be working on quite hectically in the beginning, and we'll look at that, an overview of the registration process still, lead registration process in a few slides. So data typically is expected to be the highest component and highest cost for typical registrations, lead registrations in this case, and also of course applicable to co-registrations where the letter of access fee, composition of the letter of access fee is mostly the data access costs. It depends, of course, but maybe typically this is the case. So the purpose of getting this data access is, of course, that you have the legitimate access. This is something that is actually asked in the lead when you compile the lead dossier in the K-REACH IT system. We'll have a quick look at that also in a few slides. And the aim when you are negotiating for this access is to have the right to refer to the studies for the purpose of K-REACH registration. And very important is that you should also, again, when you are considering that you will have other companies joining this joint submission, registering the same substance, then of course, for this data, you need to consider sub-licensing rights so that all the other CICO members can also join in and utilize this data for their registration purposes. In some cases, it might be that they, if you have a data access from outside of Korea, they might be saying that, okay, each CICO member needs to contact us directly for data access, and that is possible. So meaning that in some cases, companies may have to have two, for example, letter of accesses, one for the project data, project work, and one for data access. And for consortium members, it would be a data access, some sort of a license. It would not necessarily called a letter of access, but that goes a bit beyond the scope of this webinar. And a preferred format for compiling the dossier and sharing data would of course be the iEuclid file format, because everyone is quite familiar with that, even in South Korea, albeit the iEuclid as such is not used in South Korea, but it is a very good and structured file format to share data. Study reports themselves, so the original study reports are not required, but if for whatever reason this access to the actual study reports is given, then all the better. So here again, I will not go into details, just show you the playground for data access. You could have one, you could have of course your co-registrants having this data to share. You could have your own data to share. You could maybe need some additional tests to be done after you've done a data gap analysis, but you could have an EU REACH consortium that owns data. You could have a EU REACH co-registrants, lead registrants, or you could have even third parties owning data that you need. So it can be quite complex if you have a lot of these data, different data holders to manage the agreement work and related. In many cases, thankfully, they've thought about this beforehand, meaning that they're providing a single point of contact for all the data that is needed. But sometimes it's not the case. So early in this lead registration process, of course, the main thing to get things started and to be able to do a data gap analysis is, of course, that you need to check what data is already owned by all the members in the CICO. So that means the consortium members, yourself as a lead, or the lead registrant, and then of course these members that are not so active, so passive members, in other words. You have to send out this information in an email and ask what the data is, and have them provide explanation what information they should share and what information will be needed, and of course if they have any relevant studies, endpoint data, and whether this information is, they have legitimate access and the rights to sublicense this information for the benefit of this lead registration work. And this is something that this representative consulting company will do, not the lead registrant. The lead registrant, of course, can support in the process, but mostly this is the RCC that does all of this work. And they, of course, then the members, or if they have this data, they of course have to provide costs and hopefully like some sort of a breakdown how the cost has occurred. In many cases, this is not available, but I mean, they will not break down the cost. It will be a lump sum, and that's fine. We can work with that also. And then, of course, provide a set deadline by which time this should be provided back to this representative consulting company who is preparing all the lead registration related dossier work and managing the whole thing. So as mentioned, once they've done the collection of data from in the CICO, you of course need to do a data gap analysis to determine what information is still needed, if it's not available. What you can do then is that if some endpoint data is not available from inside the CICO or from third parties, then of course you could consider read across from similar substances. That's allowed. You could also consider endpoint-based waiving. So for example, if there's no exposure related to this substance pertaining to the use, you could waive such requirements for this particular endpoint. Justifications are of course needed. You could use model data, and as a last resort, you can of course go forth with a testing, but that takes time and something that probably is not very feasible for, at least for this deadline that's coming up later on this year. For the later deadlines, 27 and 30 for the lesser tonnage bands, yes, testing absolutely is possible. Maybe some even for this deadline, but no, at least not the longer tests. The lead dossier is prepared in the K-Reach IT system, and everything is in Korean language, as Gagan already mentioned. So the system as such is the only function actually that is available for in English is actually a search. You can search whether the substance is an existing substance or a new substance, essentially, as alluded to by Gagan and covered much more in detail in the December 12th webinar, which you will find on our YouTube page. I think it's not, well, you'll find it. Just some of the latest webinars there, you will find it. And of course, to be able to prepare this dossier, you need to have login information, and of course, this you need to be a Korean-based entity company to have access to this system, and to be able to create the login credentials needed. But once you have that, this is where you start preparing the dossiers. You click this, it's called substance registration part. Here's a separate menu or like an item for where you can see the CICO. Find the members of the CICO and join the CICO and stuff like that. But we'll look at the substance registration here. So when you are preparing the lead dossier, this dossier needs to be including the following information. So of course, information of the identity of the substance, classification, labeling. We looked at this. Data waivers, exemptions where applicable. We have talked about that in brief. Guidance on safe use. We also talked about that. You need to provide robust study summaries and study summaries for these key studies and supporting studies. This is the same as for EU REACH. However, if you have the actual study reports, either in English or Korean or both, these should also be included in the registration dossier. if available. If it's not available, of course, you can't include this. I would say in most cases, you will not be receiving these, but in some cases you might, and if it's in English language, then you can include it. If it's in Finnish or any other, please don't even try. So only English and Korean is accepted. And also the latest Korean MSDS, so the KOSHA version of the MSDS, essentially, to be included in the dossier. But this is company specific information. But anyway, it is something that is included also in the dossier. And of course, everything is in Korean language. And what this looks like in the K-REACH IT system is something we'll touch upon briefly next, but I thought it would be of interest for you to actually see what the system looks like. So like the KKS system for Turkey, everything is online. So you are not you're not preparing a Euclid dossier and then uploading a file here and there. You're actually preparing everything online. So when you select this registration menu button, you will come essentially to this view, which is the substance registration application view. It's a form, essentially, web page in a form format, where you then need to fill in these sections that are required here. Of course, everything is in Korean language. Here, just for your viewing pleasure, I wanted to show you what it looks like. You can have the normal edit buttons. You provide registration, registrant information, company information, and so forth. Substance information in this section, and other information here, like tonnage band, type of registration, and if some data is so to be claimed confidential, and so forth. Then, as an example, if we take one endpoint, for example, the boiling point, you will see again on the left-hand side, essentially the requirements for physical chemical properties. Here we selected the boiling point, where you provide information on the study, source of the study, reliability, date, specific information about the study, reference type, testing institution, and quite interesting, legitimate access information. So this is here you have to declare that you have legitimate access to this. And of course, this needs to be backed up so that if someone asks, then you have the proof. Study information, test guidelines, GLP compliance, so forth. Going forward in the boiling point view, substance information, study period, study results, conclusion summaries, attachments, robust study summaries, study plan where applicable, and also, as mentioned, you can, if available to you, you should also include the study reports upload. And these, if they're available in English or Korean, then you can upload, not in any other languages. And this is only if it is available to you. And you have to go through all the endpoints. So depending on your substance, you had quite a lot of different endpoint numbers. Of course, for the 100 to 1,000, we had approximately 38 endpoints to fulfill. Some of them are not, of course, applicable to you. Some can be waived depending on the substance type and so forth. Then it's not applicable. Boiling point may not be applicable and so forth. But just as an example showing what it looks like. For the CSR preparation, this is very similar to EU REACH, for example. You have the hazard assessment part and the exposure assessment, risk characterization part. All of these are required, and whether some of these, like exposure assessment and so forth, is needed is determined case by case. And this is something that is required for 10 ton and more substances. So if you're registering 10 tons or more of this substance, then of course this is required. The chemical safety assessment work is required as reported in the chemical safety report. So first you do the hazard assessment, which comprises different steps. In the interest of time, I would just not go into details here. Then the exposure assessment, containing exposure scenarios, exposure estimations, This model, the model that is used in Korea is the Korean Ministry Environment model for the risk characterization work. And all of this, again, I'm just skipping a bit because time is getting long. Invite you again to just pause this in YouTube if you want to have more information. But this is very similar to eReach, so fairly straightforward, albeit a lot of work, of course, but fairly straightforward. So all of this for the risk assessment or risk characterization at the end, information from both the hazard assessment we looked at in the previous slide and the exposure assessment is then combined. And then we have a documenting the conditions of the exposure scenarios, defining under which conditions the risks are adequately controlled. So this is the whole thing. It boils down to what measures do you need to take to adequately control the risks of this substance during use of the substance and so forth. And all of this is then pulled together in a chemical safety report where all of these are documented, these different the hazard assessment, exposure assessment, and risk characterization as applicable. And this CSR is then at the end attached to the lead dossier and will be part of the submission to the Ministry of Environment and Urbanization. And this CSR is typically prepared in the KKSR tool, and it can be accessed through the K-Reach IT system. And just to show you what it looks like, I will not go into any details here. First of all, I do not read Korean, so that is a bit of a handicap, but nonetheless, we have the overview page, and where you the next page is where you input basic information of the substance, and then in the third one, this is where you actually develop these risk management measures, the exposure scenarios, and more. Some of these fields are hidden just not to show any confidential information. But at least now you've seen what the system, the KSR tool, looks like. As said, we'll not go into details here. That's a subject for potential other webinar at some point. So you need, as a lead registrant, when you have done all of this, you should submit the lead registrant in good time before the registration deadline, simply for the purpose of giving enough time for all the co-registrants to go through the hoops of purchasing the letter of access and having time to compile the dossier and submitting the dossier to the MOE and getting an approval for the registration. Ideally, this would mean that you submit 6 months prior to the deadline, but if you are now starting with the lead dossier development for the upcoming deadline end of this year, it probably will not be feasible to submit 6 months prior, because that would mean we should submit by end of June, and that is probably a bit tight, depending on how much work is involved, of course, in the lead dossier development. So this NIR, who is checking these dossiers that have been submitted to the Ministry of Environment in Korea, they check it for both completeness and compliance before then issuing a notice that this dossier has been accepted. And as with any other REACH and REACH-like chemical regulation, you as both a co-registrant and as lead registrant, you of course have the ongoing obligation to keep this dossier up to date, and that's why, for example, this representative consulting company will also be there for the long run to make sure that the dossier is kept up to date, and when new information is needed or becomes available, for example, spontaneously, you get new information from your supply chain, maybe the CICO members, or maybe if the NIR contacts you to ask you for additional clarifications, additional information as part of the lead dossier, and so forth. And maybe the consortium, if you bought information from a EU consortium and they update the tests, then this information should also trickle down to you in K-Reach in your dossiers. And of course, new legislative requirements, updates to classification, labeling information, and so forth will also drive these spontaneous updates. And just quickly, of course, you have the legal obligation to cooperate in this joint submission even after your registration deadline. So this means that this representative consulting company on behalf of the CICO needs to still be able to issue letter of accesses. They have to manage and keep the dossier up to date, updates, coordinate responses with authorities and regulatory bodies. And if there are requests for updates to the dossier or related information, then of course this is something you have to comply with and respond to. Yeah, I will not go into further detail here in the interest of time. We're already coming up to 1.5 hours. So sorry for going over time, as usual. Anyway, if we look at the timeline as an example for the 100 to 1,000 ton per year K-REACH lead registration, so the deadline is end of this year, what should happen? So today we are here at the red dot, beginning of March. This is where the time where you should, if you haven't already, if you are a member of a CICO, your only representative is a member of a CICO, you are starting the work, but there is no activities in the CICO, there's no lead registrant, for example, and so forth. This is when you need to start taking action. Start with the lead registrant selection, do that as quickly as possible, then set up the consortium and the CICO related work, such as defining the agreements for the letter of access issuances, of course, who will be an active or passive member and so forth. Conduct the data gap analysis, check with all the CICO members who has what information and available and so forth. Negotiate access to missing data, and of course, if needed, you could do additional tests, albeit that this we're probably don't have enough time for that, depending on the test, of course. Prepare the lead dossier and the CSR, and of course, this is something that all of this essentially from this point forward, is handled by this representative consulting company. Submission in August, near review. It takes like typically 30 days, but it can be extended with additional 60 days if needed. But I think they will be very practical in this case and accept the registration, and later on maybe require companies to update or the lead registrant to update the dossier if there are some small issues at the in the dossier about submission. But let's assume they will accept the registration and they will issue a registration number, essentially notice that your registration has been accepted. At that point in time, all the other ones can start with their co-registration efforts by letter of access and so forth. In some cases, of course, you can initiate these discussions already earlier, but they cannot submit their dossiers before the lead has been accepted. So here we've generous 3 months for the co-registrants to purchase a letter of access and prepare their dossier and submit it to the Ministry of Environment to have everything done and dusted by the registration deadline end of this year. So like this is the shortest timeline example. This is not a standard. Usually it takes like 1.5 years to prepare a lead dossier, but this is like squeezed and squeezed then again to show like if you now would have to start, this would be the timeline you have available. 6 months for the lead registration work to complete, and then 3 months minimum, I would say, for the co-registrants to get their work done. And for costs, nothing earth-shattering here. Just wanted to show the division between the different cost items, data, of course, being highly likely the highest cost item per the joint registration, and then the work. So the work you're paying, for example, for the representative consulting company, and your own work, of course, as a lead. But the Ministry of Environment registration fee is nominal, as Gagan said, very, very small. So it really doesn't pay much. Let's say, does not provide a lot of weight in this cost pie, if you will. So fixed authority fees are very low in South Korea for K-REACH. All right, we're coming to the end fairly shortly, and just wanted to summarize with an action plan for the deadline. I think you are already getting the sense that we are a bit in a hurry, and that is true. If you need to start from scratch, then absolutely now is the time to start the work. Determine what resources you have available to make the lead registration happen, and get help early in the process. Contact the representative consulting company when you have the chance to do that, and get set up, such as REACHLaw, for example. Communicate your intentions to become the lead registrant in the CICO, and then of course you need to go through the election process or selection process, and by majority vote be voted, or if there are no other candidates, they still need to agree to have you as a lead. Find this representative consulting company if you haven't done it already, and start the joint registration work then as soon as possible. But this representative consulting company should know what they're doing, so they should take over fairly quickly here and start the work. And start, of course, with data access negotiations and acquiring the legitimate access for the data needed, and of course considering sub-licensing rights, so all the other CICO members can also register. And then submit your dossier, the lead dossier, as early as possible, at least 3 months before the deadline, to give enough time for the co-registrants to register. And of course, be active with the communication and keep the CICO members up to date. So this is more of a action item for the representative consulting company, of course, but you, as a lead, you are also there. Document everything, and of course keep the dossier up to date. And conclusions, I will not reiterate some of the points I looked at in the action plan, but of course the K-REACH regulation has already been enforced, and the next deadline is coming up end of this year. Late pre-registration is still possible under certain conditions if you haven't late pre-registered. And of course, in any case, please feel free to contact REACHLaw if you need help with any of this. We'll be happy to help. And joint submissions, of course, must have a lead, and co-registrants must become part of the joint submission through the CICO. And choose the lead registrant wisely, albeit it's not such a big deal as we saw already, and start with the work as soon as possible. And submit the dossier in time, take care of the lead registration obligations, and then please keep in mind that we at REACHLaw, of course, can be your professional K-REACH only representative. We can be the lead registrant, or we can be this representative consulting company, but we cannot be the representative consulting company and a lead registrant at the same time for the same company. But we can be a co-registrant and a representative consulting company. So interesting. Anyway, we stand ready to support you with your K-REACH efforts and more. So please feel free to reach out to us at any time. We'd be happy to help. For example, contact Gagan or myself directly, or contact us at sales@reachlaw.fi, for example. And now, considering we are so much over time, I will just take a few quick questions here, and starting with the ones we were submitted, some of the questions submitted before this, as part of the registration process. So there was a question about this, if a Korean customer is registering a product mixture he purchased from us, I guess this company, asking, we are forced to give the whole composition is question marks. So no, you are not forced to give the composition if, for example, you have an OR that will take care of the registration process. You can also keep this composition confidential in the safety data sheet under certain provisions according to the KOSHA regulations. So there are possibilities to claim information confidential, similar to EU REACH and safety data sheet information related. But if your customer is supposed to register and not yourself through an OR, then of course they have to know what substances they need to register. So in that case, you will have to provide the details. But the best way would be to have an OR, an only representative, because then you do not have to disclose the composition to your customers in Korea. And Gagan, I'll just go through this quite quickly. So feel free to elaborate if needed.
Yeah.
So, and Gagan actually covered this already, the K-REACH. When will the change regarding volume threshold for new registrations increase from 100 to 1,000 tons? So this is for new substances, and it's starting next year. So it will be increased from 100 kilograms to 1,000 kilograms, but only applicable for new substances, and meaning that if you have 1,000 kilograms, 1 ton per year, you will have to register. And if it's less, you have to notify. You still have to notify, and it's a pre-registration like type of a process, but it's called a notification, new substance notification. And then there's a question that is quite tricky or loaded, if you will. What is the price value in K-REACH compared with EU REACH for studies, letter of access, and so forth? Is there industry standard, for example, 20% of the EU REACH study and so forth? So the answer is no. So there's no standard. You can, the data holders outside of Korea can ask, for example, for any fees for that data that is needed. But I would say a fair amount would be if you compare the market size of EU versus Korea for that substance, and somehow on that basis try to extrapolate a fair value for the studies needed. But there are no fixed fees or anything. This is something that needs to be negotiated upon requesting this information from the data holders. And then a question, does REACHLaw have representation in Korea, or is K-REACH piloted from India office? So yes, we do absolutely have our own subsidiary in India. We have in India, yes, also, but in South Korea, in Seoul. Why our colleagues from Seoul are not in this webinar is because the late hour in South Korea, it's +7 hours. So one of these days I will have them do the midnight shift, and they will be part of this webinar also. But for the time being, it is Gagan and myself, because Gagan has been working a lot with K-REACH for Indian clients previously, and that's why Gagan is an expert and also co-hosting this webinar together with me. But it is not piloted from the Indian office. We have our own office in South Korea with dedicated people working on that. Of course, in lead registration cases, we will leverage the expertise we have, for example, here in Finland, in Helsinki, the head office, where we've done a lot of lead registrations. But that's normal lead registration work, and we'll utilize all resources we have, of course. And then the last question, if a substance is evaluated to be toxic, a toxic substance in K-REACH, will the relevant requirements be indicated together with the registration approval? So if I understand this question correctly, and Gagan, you can elaborate, but if I understand this correctly, it means what they are trying to ask is, will there be additional conditions set in the registration approval for this particular substance? And the answer is no. There would be, of course, if your dossier is not adequate, then the NER will come back and say that, hey, you need to update this before it's approved. But additional requirements post-registration is not the way it works. It's not an authorization per se, because authorizations have conditions of use coupled with it by the authorities, but not for K-REACH registration. Yeah, go ahead, Gagan,
Yeah,
please.
Yes, and I think just to add your comment, for this toxic, I think the only requirement you will have is to add this once you will get this designation number. You need to add this in your MSDS in section 15 under regulatory status. So that is something you need to do. But as such, there is no specific in this registration that you need to provide.
Yes. Thank you, Gagan. Okay, I'll just take some very quick questions here. We have several questions. Will you share the presentation? No, we will not, but you can look at it on YouTube. You can take screenshots and so forth. This is our policy. Let's see, there was a question. If you are the lead registrant for 100 to 1,000 tons, And one tox study won't be completed by June, so I guess you are submitting in June. Can you submit that one study in June so that the co-registrant can file their registrations and then update the dossier before December 2024? So again, in this case, I would, and Gagan, feel free to elaborate, but I would check with the NEAR when you are working, or your representative consulting company or whomever is working on this, to contact NEAR and get specific advice on your specific condition. But I would say that they are fairly pragmatic, so I think they would approve this sort of an approach.
Yeah, I think you need to get some weight to your justification, maybe some communication that you have already this issue with the CRO, and that can be used as a justification to contact the authority. That's the correct advice already now.
Yes, yes. I'll try to spot some of these which we haven't covered. So can a registrant interested to be the lead registrant become the lead registrant without the consent of the CICO members? The answer is no. You need always consent of the CICO members, a majority. So this we covered. Is there a tool similar to iEuclid for K-Reach? So no, I think this question came before I submitted, showed the K-Reach IT system. So it's not iEuclid, it's K-Reach IT system. Everything is online. Let's see, let's take one last one. This is to you. You covered this, Gagan, already. And those questions which we did not answer here will come back by email, and feel free to reach out to us also. Gagan, last question. Are the research and development materials subject to registration? I guess they're asking, can they apply for exemption?
Yes, so no, the answer is no. You need to apply for exemption. And I think this is, we covered, which is under Article 11 of K-Reach. But you need to obtain the confirmation from Ministry of Environment before placing this substances to Korea. And their term is, I think, chemical substances for scientific experimentations, so that research and development will satisfy this. So they don't use research and development as such, but they use research, then scientific experimentation or something. But this is, I think, it's same. So no, but you have to apply for exemption before placing this to Korea. So they will give you some confirmation of exemption kind of certificate.
Thank you, Gagan. Okay, so again, thank you very much for sticking through this long-winded presentation. It was went over time, almost 45 minutes. I think this is a record, but thank you very much for sticking around, and I hope you enjoyed and got as much information out of this as possible. And please feel free to reach out to us with any more questions, or if you need help, we'll be very happy to help you. And of course, remember to sign up for the next K-Reach webinar. This will be the part 2, which is probably applicable to many more companies, because we are going to talk about the K-Reach co-registration work for the deadline end of this year. So we'll go more in detail into the law process and what co-registrants need to check, and the CICO functionalities, being an active and passive member and so forth, because this was one of the questions, and we'll go through that in more detail during that webinar. Next webinar is March 19th, same time, same place, same people. And of course, with that, we thank you very much for your attention, for sticking around. And as said, please feel free to reach out to Gagan and myself on any questions you may have. And thank you very much, and I wish you a very nice day, and stay safe.
Thank you. Good day. Good evening.